My sister stole my scholarship story for a job interview and said I didn't deserve it anyway. Now she's jobless and I'm running the project she applied for. I, 31 female, am the youngest of two. My sister, Camille, 34 female, and I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's a pretty, quiet town, the kind where people know your last name and your business, whether you like it or not. Our parents, Rachel and Brian, owned a small accounting firm, the kind that got by mostly during tax season and the occasional business consultation. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. Camille and I were never close. That's not me being bitter, that's just how it was. From the time we were little, she needed to win. At everything. If we both came home with an A, she needed to ask which one of us got the better comments from the teacher. If I made a new friend, she needed to charm them away. She was sharp, driven, and charismatic. She always knew how to work a room, charm our relatives, and get into the good graces of teachers. Me? I was quieter. More reserved. I read books. Volunteered. I didn't have Camille's shine, but I had depth. It's hard to explain to people who didn't grow up under someone like that, how even when you succeed, it feels like you're standing in someone else's shadow. And no matter how well you do, you're the other one. But I didn't resent her. Not exactly. I made peace with being different. I went to Temple University, majored in international studies, and poured myself into service projects. I worked part-time through school, applied for scholarships, and kept my head down. I wasn't flashy, but I was steady. Camille took a different route. She majored in marketing, jumped from job to job, city to city. For a while, she was in San Francisco, then Chicago. She always had stories, always reinventing herself. I admired that, in a way. But there was always a crash that followed. She'd burn out, get fired, or blame her boss for not recognizing her genius. 3 years ago, she came back home after quitting a well-paying job at a big firm in Chicago. She said she was taking a mental health sabbatical. My parents welcomed her with open arms, of course. She moved back into her old room, which our mom had kept perfectly intact, as if she'd never left. Meanwhile, I was staying at home temporarily to save money before a big move. We were back under the same roof. And everything felt like high school again. I was applying for fellowships. There was one in particular I had my heart set on, the Roseworth Global Initiative. It's a selective year-long leadership program focused on global infrastructure and recovery. Each participant is assigned to a major recovery effort in a developing country. I had done some disaster relief work during undergrad in New Orleans, which really shaped how I saw the world. That became the centerpiece of my essay, helping rebuild a home in the lower 9th Ward after Katrina, being 19, overwhelmed, but knowing in that moment that this was the kind of work I wanted to do forever. I worked on that essay for weeks. I cried while writing it. I asked my old professor from Temple to read it over. I edited every word. I knew, when I clicked submit, that it was one of the best things I'd ever written. I told Camille about it one night while we were both in the kitchen. It was awkward. We didn't talk much, but I was proud and wanted to share. Her response? Huh. That's kind of a sob story, but I guess that's what they want. Good luck. Something about how she said it, it wasn't dismissive, exactly. Just, cold. Like I was a kid playing pretend. I didn't know, then, that she'd gone into my room a few nights later while I was at my friend Keisha's apartment. I left my laptop open. I'd been editing my statement and forgot to close the file. I wasn't thinking much about it, I trusted her, stupidly. I'd always assumed that no matter how competitive or complicated things were between us, she wouldn't actually steal from me. But that's exactly what she did. She copied my personal statement. Changed a few things, mostly names. Removed mention of Roseworth and instead repurposed the story for a job application. A nonprofit in DC called the Maya Foundation, one I'd actually heard of and considered applying to a year prior, was hiring for a program director position. It was high level. I would never have applied for it then. Camille, however, saw it as a fast track back into relevance. I didn't know any of this at the time. What I did know was that I got accepted into Roseworth. When the email came, I was at a Starbucks downtown. I just stared at it, frozen. It was the kind of letter you dream about, full of congratulations and next steps and travel stipends. I burst into tears right there, in front of a barista who didn't know what to do with me. I ran home to tell my parents. They were thrilled. Even Camille gave me a polite clap and a tight smile. But a few days later, things unraveled. I came home early from a walk one afternoon and heard her yelling on a Zoom call from the kitchen. Her voice was rising, flustered, saying things like, "No, that's not how I meant it, of course I was there." I walked in and saw her laptop open. The logo of the Maya Foundation was in the corner. I didn't say anything. Just quietly filled my water bottle and left the room. But something was off. Later that night, I noticed a file open on the family desktop. She must have used it to print something and forgotten to close out of her Google Drive. My name was in the file name. It was my essay. Not even paraphrased. Not reimagined. My essay, my words, copy-pasted into her job application folder. I sat there, staring at the screen, numb. When I confronted her, she didn't even flinch. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and said, "You weren't even going to use it for a real job. You're doing some volunteer mission trip crap. I need something stable." "It's not like you own the story, Meredith." I asked her how she could do that. She shrugged. "Look, you write well, fine. I needed something that sounded real. Your version sounded real. You'll be off in Asia with your mud huts and mosquito nets. Let me have a chance here." I was shaking. My voice cracked. I told her it was dishonest. That she could have asked, at the very least. That she'd betrayed me. And she laughed. "Grow up. The world's not fair. They don't care who wrote what. They'll care who can lead." I showed our parents. My dad was furious. My mom started crying. Camille stormed out that night, stayed at a friend's place. My parents begged me not to tell the foundation. "Don't destroy her chances," my mother said. "You got what you wanted. Let her have this." I didn't report her. I didn't have to. The Maya Foundation rescinded her offer. Apparently, during the final interview round, someone from their vetting committee reached out to one of the New Orleans community partners I had listed in my application. The timelines didn't match. Her references flubbed basic facts. They figured it out. She was blacklisted. And suddenly, the sister who told me I didn't deserve what I earned was unemployed, again. Meanwhile, I left for Tacloban, Philippines. Roseworth placed me in a major post-disaster recovery program. It was grueling. But it was real. And I earned every part of it. A year later, I was asked to return to the US to present at a conference hosted by the Maya Foundation. And when I stepped on stage to give a keynote about sustainable community engagement, I saw my sister's resume, yes, the same one, pinned to a display board titled "Cautionary Tales and Vetting." She was their case study. I stood there on the stage, gripping the sides of the podium, pretending my hands weren't shaking. The room was full, rows of nonprofit professionals, government partners, donors. I spotted a few familiar faces from my time in Tacloban, people I'd worked side by side with in sweltering heat, mud up to our knees. People who knew I was the kind of person who didn't just write essays. I showed up. But seeing Camille's name, even just her resume printed out on a display board near the exit, jolted me. It was surreal. There it was, my story, her name. Crossed out with a red pen. Failed integrity screening, it read in bold. I hadn't expected that. No one told me beforehand. I don't even think they realized we were related. The irony was just cosmic. After the talk, I lingered at the refreshment table, sipping cold lemon water and trying not to let the adrenaline show. One of the program directors came up to me, Eleanor Carver, a well-respected leader in the nonprofit space. She shook my hand warmly. "You know," she said, "that story you told about rebuilding homes in New Orleans? It's powerful. We've heard versions of it before, but never as authentically." I tried to smile. "That's because mine actually happened." She nodded slowly. "Yeah. We figured that out the hard way." She didn't say Camille's name. She didn't have to. That moment wasn't triumphant, exactly. It wasn't like the movies, where the villain is dragged away in handcuffs and you get a standing ovation. It was quieter than that. Sadder, too. Because at that moment, I realized how small Camille's world had become. She'd been trying to climb a ladder she didn't want to build herself. And now she was on the ground. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. That was the thing with Camille, she did the damage herself. She just never imagined there would be consequences. After the conference, things moved fast. The foundation offered me a contract to head up a new international partnership initiative. They were expanding operations to the Caribbean, and they wanted someone who had both field experience and the ability to lead a multi-year development framework. The kind of role people usually work decades for. I wasn't even 30. When I told my parents, my dad was proud, over the moon, actually. He made some awkward joke about how he always knew both his girls were smart, but we both heard the awkwardness behind it. My mom just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey," before switching the topic to what we wanted for dinner. Camille, though? She didn't say anything. Not at first. She was still living at home, alternating between calling it a creative break and a forced reset. I knew she was struggling, but I also knew better than to pity her. Camille didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she did. She just floated through the house like a ghost, making little comments here and there. "I guess it's easier when you have people throwing jobs at you," she said once, not even looking up from her phone. I ignored her. She tried a few things: freelance consulting, some podcasts with a pretentious title like Unfiltered Grit, a blog that she gave up on after 3 posts. Our parents tried to be supportive, but even their patience had limits. By then, I was splitting time between DC and the field offices. I had a modest apartment in Arlington, barely decorated because I was rarely home, but I loved it. It was mine. I was working 60-hour weeks, pulling 2 a.m. Zoom calls with teams in Haiti and Indonesia, reviewing environmental impact reports, negotiating with local officials. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. But it was the kind of exhaustion that comes with purpose. Every so often, I'd get these odd texts from Camille. Like clockwork. Saw your name in an article. Wild. Did you ever think you'd be the one people talked about? Hope DC is treating you well. I never responded. I wanted to. Sometimes, I typed out paragraphs. Not angry ones, not bitter ones. Just honest things. Things like, "You hurt me. You didn't just steal words. You tried to erase who I was." But I deleted them every time. Because what was the point? There was one night, though, when I came close to hitting send. It was raining, and I'd just gotten off a late call with a partner in Port-au-Prince. I was tired and homesick and a little lonely. I had this sudden urge to hear her voice, to know why she did it. Not the fake, flippant reason. The real one. That night, she texted again, "Still think you didn't just get lucky?" I stared at that message for what felt like an hour. And then I blocked her. Not out of spite. But because I realized I didn't need anything from her anymore. Not closure. Not an apology. Not even acknowledgement. I had everything I needed. The work. The purpose. The peace. And Camille? She had the ghost of a story that never belonged to her. Months passed after I blocked her. Work kept me too busy to think about Camille much, at least most of the time. The new initiative was taking off. We were working on coastal resilience in small island nations, helping communities rebuild more sustainably after extreme weather. It was the kind of work that consumed you, and I was grateful for that. Still, every now and then, I'd wonder. Not about her well-being, exactly, more about whether she ever reflected. Whether she regretted it. Or if she still told herself the same story, that I didn't deserve it, that she had a right to what she took. I didn't hear from her directly, but I began to hear her name again. Quietly. In conversations. In cautionary anecdotes told among HR directors and nonprofit recruiters. "Be careful," they'd say, "some applicants are great on paper, but it's someone else's paper." There was a story they used as an example during a training module. About a woman who plagiarized a disaster relief account for a job interview. They didn't use her name, but I knew. I knew. It was like Camille had become a whispered warning. A living lesson. One day, about a year and a half after everything, I got an unexpected message from my old professor at Temple, Dr. Ramirez. He asked if I'd be willing to speak at a professional development panel for graduating seniors. It was part of a new ethics series they were launching, Authenticity in Action. I said yes, of course. The panel was held in a modest auditorium back on campus. When I walked in, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia, same old brick walls, same smell of coffee from the cafe downstairs, students rushing with laptops and tangled headphones. I took my seat between two other speakers, both accomplished professionals in public service, and waited for the moderator to begin. As we were doing introductions, a young woman in the back raised her hand. "Do you ever worry about your stories being taken?" she asked. Like, does being honest ever make you vulnerable? It was a fair question. A real one. I could tell by her face that she wasn't asking hypothetically. I paused for a moment, then answered. I used to think vulnerability was a weakness. That telling the truth made you easy to take advantage of. But the thing about honesty is, it leaves a trail. When people lie, they have to remember the version they made up. When you're honest, your story holds up every time. Because you lived it. I scanned the crowd, feeling steady. Whole. Afterward, I was approached by a woman from a publishing group. She said she loved my talk and asked if I'd ever consider turning my work into a book, stories from the field, reflections on ethics, maybe even personal chapters. I was stunned. A book? Me? But I didn't say no. That night, I sat in my tiny hotel room with a notepad in my lap. I started scribbling down memories, names, dates. Not Camille's name, of course, but her story? It was there. Tucked into the narrative. Not as revenge, but as a truth. A truth others could learn from. A few months later, something poetic happened. We received an application for an entry-level role at our DC office, program associate, a modest but important job. I didn't usually review resumes for those, but our recruitment officer flagged this one for me. It was Camille. She had applied under a slightly modified version of her name, Camilla Rhodes, but her resume gave her away. Same college, same dates, same exaggerated consulting firm that didn't exist past her LinkedIn bio. I stared at the screen for a long while. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel much at all, honestly. I just smiled. Our HR policy required 2 members of senior staff to review flagged applicants. I added a brief note to the file. Candidate was previously found to have submitted fraudulent material to multiple organizations. Application rejected. That was it. No call. No confrontation. No drama. Just quiet, clean justice. She never knew I saw it. She never got a dramatic scene. But I imagine she checked her inbox every day for a week, hoping for a response, wondering why no one replied. Maybe she even thought she had a chance. Maybe she thought I'd be too far removed to notice. She was wrong. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was measured. I got to keep living the life I built. She got to watch it, knowing she tried to steal it, and failed. And that was more satisfying than anything I could have planned.